I am when you are.
Okay, let's do it. Okay, so this is the Medication and Horse Welfare Committee agenda or committee meeting. So we are going to be talking about a few things regarding HISA, I believe. So anyone have a concern with the agenda? Discussion, which is discussion and possible HISA exemption, discussion of the HISA compliance, and recommendations by Senior Commission Veterinarian Tom Everman.
No issues here. I move to approve it.
Good. Anyone else? Someone to second? Me, a
I'll
second?
second.
Okay, let's go. So who wants to start the discussion of the possible HISA exemption, which I have right in front of me here? And this is just for furosemide?
Correct. I don't know if Connie's on the call. Maybe
Yep,
she wants to
she's
give
here.
a little bit of an overview. But Connie, do you want to do that, or should I jump right into the discussion?
May I ask Randy Bodine to talk about their organization's view on this, because he sent us a letter on this.
Okay, that would be great.
Randy, are you able to speak to your association's take on this?
Yeah, and I mean, the point was, I guess, in asking for the extension, which this has kind of been published even before HISA was starting to get organized, that they were going to offer this as a possibility. And what it sort of does is, especially for smaller jurisdictions like us, it sort of mediates the damage that's going to be, and I don't, damage probably isn't the right word, but it certainly mediates the effects of Lasix taking it away, and gives us a little bit more time to get things up in the air, and also gives more time for HISA to get themselves lined up in a row and see if they can streamline some of this stuff. And that was, I believe, the whole point of why they came up with the idea of offering this in the first place, was because they knew it was going to have, could have very, far-reaching effects, especially on the smaller jurisdictions. So originally it was supposed to be, they were going to start with 2-year-olds and stakes races, and then eventually it would have become all horses with no Lasix. And this would give us, the extension would give us the extra time to make sure that, we can ease into this change rather than being thrown in.
Okay, so this is a request. It will exempt the use of furosemide in all horses except for 2-year-old covered horses and stake races, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Anyone else want to chime in?
Yes, I would love to. I think we're putting the cart in front of the horses. We are not a HISA jurisdiction at the present time. My personal wish is that we never become a HISA jurisdiction. I think that's a terrible statute that is non-sensible and not in the best interest of the equine athlete or the industry. So I don't know why we have to ask for an exception of something that doesn't apply to us. I don't know if if we're planning on taking outside of our jurisdiction bets, but right now we're not doing it. So why even restrict stakes races and 2-year-olds? Why give the legal appearance that we are subjecting ourselves to HISA by signing a document that we don't have to sign?
Randy?
And I completely agree with everything that Commissioner Conde is saying. My only thought was, when I sent this in, was I don't have a great degree of trust in maybe some of this, the way that the feds might like to do things. And I just don't, I wouldn't want them to come back 6 months from now and saying, we're forcing this on you unless you have the exemption. And I can't prove or disprove that would ever happen, but that was really my only thought about, you know, sending this letter in, but I certainly do not disagree with Commissioner Condi.
So we're, just so I'm clear, we're not subject to HISA because they're not simulcasting at the race meets?
That is correct.
Well, then I would agree with Diego that why submit it if it's not in effect?
Yeah, no, and I have no problem with that. I just wanted to put it out there that, you know, if they would change the rules at all and say, well, we're not going to give you the option.
Well, they may, and then we'll have to submit I mean, we can
Well,
fill it out and not submit it.
Yeah,
But
so
could I throw something in there? I think that HISA will throw this document back at us as an invalid request. If we are
Probably.
not a covered jurisdiction, they're going to say, you're not part of HISA. What you need to do first is pay your assessment and join HISA, and then you can get the exception.
Go ahead, Connie.
I was just gonna say, there was a time limit that this has to be submitted before we start racing, and I believe it was like, was it
45
30
days, right?
45 days. So, you know, I mean, we can certainly table it, but I think we need to be aware of it, if nothing else.
sure.
So if we do decide to go and start simulcasting, because there's a lot of money being left on the table by not simulcasting, we can at least consider this. Because I do think
Randy?
we'd probably want to do this if we were going to go HISA.
Oh,
Randy, what-
100%.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Randy, what's your feeling on simulcasting?
Well, you know, it all sounds good, and I've heard Connie say that a couple times. I mean, for the horsemen, make a little money off of simulcasting. Our percentage is, you know, what it is, but just to be clear, I mean, the racetrack loses money every single day that they do this, because it's just the nature of the beast. I don't care if you're Churchill Downs, I don't care if you're NYRA, whoever you are, live racing loses money. It's just that way it is. And so the best they ever did when TMB was doing this was a $480,000 or $800,000 night. But to even actually break even, they would have had to go over $1 million by some distance. And Rod could probably tell you the number closer than I can. But so from that standpoint, you know, I'm not sure that it's the gold mine people would like to think it is. So,
So you don't have any plans to do it at this point in time?
no.
And I'd say we just keep it in the back of our minds. So does this
I agree.
does this lead into number 3, discussion of HISA compliance?
I believe so.
So we've already done that, really, right?
Yeah, we don't have to comply with it until we start simulcasting. And yeah, it gives some dollars to the industry, but they're covered in cyanide. So I don't know if we want to do that right now.
Yes, I could add a couple of things about the HISA situation that is happening right now, because I am attending a regulatory veterinary meeting every Tuesday. That's a national meeting of all the regulatory veterinarians in the nation, or most of them. Most of the jurisdictions are represented. And then there's a lot of problems right now facing 45 days from now going into the testing and medication compliance part of this, the HIWU, it's called Horse Racing Integrity Welfare Unit, which is going into effect January 1. And what they're finding is that all the horses that work at the racetrack have to be tested. And that means they have to staff the test barn at 6 a.m. all training days, not just race days. So these are things to consider when you think about joining HISA, is the amount of staff that would be required. Because I just got a letter, email this morning with an urgent call recruiting veterinarians to work for HISA, to staff test barns, do pre-race exams, because they appointed all these generals to run this, but they don't have an army behind them. And they don't have the people to do what the statute calls for them to do. So there's going to be a big problem as the spring comes along and more racing takes place, and maybe even right after January, because the southern states will be running. So there's a lot of things that go with HISA and HIWU that people are only now beginning to realize how much this is actually going to cost. So just something to consider. Yeah, Rod.
So I'd like to speak on that. I was at a quarter horse meeting in Indiana at Horseshoe Downs, or Horseshoe, Indiana. And we talked about this. And they have a list, they sent out a list in my packet of all of the tracks that joined HISA last year, or that were, they put a number on all the tracks of what HISA cost last year if everybody joined it. It was $14 million last year for all of the racetracks. This year, with the medication, estimate right now is another $72 million on top of the 14 million that was spent last year. So that 72 million will be spread out between every racetrack, depending on how many days and so on and so forth. So you could see a $500,000, $750,000 that could cost Oregon just to sign up with HISA.
The estimates I got were for about 50,000 for the safety and roughly 400,000 for the track.
Yeah,
For a
450.
20-day meet is pretty hefty.
Yeah,
Oh,
I think for any length meet is very hefty. I think it shows the nonsensical approach of HISA, and I have been on record, and I will continue to be on the record to say without a hesitation that that act was promoted by PETA and non-racing interests. It has nothing to do with horse equine welfare. It's all about strangling the industry until we're out of business.
well, it sounds like something we don't have to worry about, at least at this moment in time.
Amen.
Well, the other thing to consider that came up in the meeting yesterday, which the subject of the meeting was controlled substances, is Susan Gale from Arizona asked about mixed meat, quarter horse and thoroughbred tracks, and how this is going to work with HISA, because we've had that in our discussion before. And the HISA representative, Mary Scalay, who's in charge of the horse racing welfare unit, said that they will do no testing at all on quarter horses. So the state will still be responsible to do all their own testing for quarter horses. And the act only applies to thoroughbreds. So we'd have a split jurisdiction. We'd have split testing unless we complied and made the quarter horses comply with the HISA requirements. We would have split medication rules depending on the breed, on Lasix, non-steroidals, corticosteroids, everything. And we'd have to have separate laboratory testing, which will also be a question we need to address. With your permission, I'll call the laboratory here in the next few days and see if they are going to be willing to continue to do our testing, because their standards will be completely changed. There will only be a few small jurisdictions that operate on our standards, and most of their testing will be at the detection limit. So it'll be interesting to see what they say on continuing with our work.
Yeah, well, it's worth
Oh.
checking out.
Yep.
I do want to clarify that if it's a mixed race, the thoroughbreds are not covered, so you wouldn't have to test in a mixed race. But again, we're not going HISA right now, so it's kind of a moot point.
Mr. Twiggs, you have anything to add to this?
Not really. I agree with pretty much everything that's being said. You know that on my end of things, if we were to go with HISA, I think I've got it covered. You know, I can follow this flow chart that's in this HISA Stewards Manual and all that, and that would be on my end of things. And I can make that happen. But I have to agree with Dr. Everman that, you know, this is a can of worms, so to speak, and I would just prefer, at this point anyway, not to go with HISA.
Well, I think ultimately it's gonna depend on the horsemen and whether or not they want to simulcast. Right, Randy?
Yeah, I mean, and that, but again, we're gonna have to constantly weigh this over and over again every year and make our judgment. But at this moment, I would love to, I can't see a day when the finances are gonna make any sense. So,
Maybe Rod could speak to that as far as the commercial meat and how, you know, HISA versus no HISA, simulcast versus no simulcast. How does that work, Rod?
Well, as Randy alluded to before, the number that I came up with when I was with TMB is a break-even point just to operate the track, just doing simulcasting is about 1.2 million. And so we have never got close to that. Portland Meadows almost never got close to that. So like Randy said, for us on a financial basis, it's a losing proposition as a racetrack. The horsemen get a percentage, the state gets a percentage. A lot of people get some monies out of that, but the track loses money. And so it doesn't make a lot of sense. We get a lot of recognition for it. Maybe, you know, maybe you get some horses that wouldn't normally come because you're simulcasting. So there's some hidden benefits to it. But even without HISA, it would have been a tough call right now to even simulcast just because of the financial part of it. With HISA thrown into it and all the regulations, then that even makes it less likely for us to do this unless something really changes with HISA down the road. You know, we were in the discussion yesterday with the fair meet and Connie talked, and, you know, we're talking about, you know, a little less money possibly with the ORC coming into this next year. We're barely making it the way it is. And then you throw the cost of HISA, if it is $450,000 on top of it. And then it's stuff like what you talked about, Dr. Everman. You have a split test barn because HISA would run part of it, and then you'd still have to run part of it with the quarter horses, because the quarter horses are exempt from this and plan on staying exempt. In my quarter horse
Well, I think we just keep it in the back of our minds.
Yes.
No, go ahead. Finish up.
So in our quarter horse meeting, they don't plan on the quarter horses. It's 3 to 5 years before they think the quarter horses would be roped into this deal.
Well, I'd say we keep it in the back of our mind, and I guess we're gonna have to rely on you guys to let us know if you want to start thinking about simulcasting, and Connie has to keep her ear to the ground for any changes in the HISA rules that may then affect us regardless of the simulcasting. Right, Connie?
Absolutely.
Great.
Agreed.
Moving on. Dr. Everman, do you have anything else you want to discuss about medication?
Well, I wanted to ask specifically Diego, whether I should join HISA as a covered person, or if the agreement, which I've read, it states in the agreement that if you're a covered person as a veterinarian, you agree to comply with all the HISA regulations, and our meat won't comply with it. So my thought is I should not join HISA. I'd like Diego's opinion on that.
In a very lawyerly fashion, I will tell you, let me look into it further and tell you tomorrow. But my knee-jerk reaction is that you should not be a covered person because, for example, if we allow LASIX for 2-year-olds or in stakes races or viewed within 48 hours, you as a covered veterinarian under HISA would be breaching HISA.
Right.
Even when we're not a HISA jurisdiction. And I think it might have some repercussions on you and perhaps your license, not necessarily the ORC or our horse racing industry. So I would think that I'm not allowed to give you legal advice. I think maybe Connie and I can do an informal chat with our AG and see what it's, her 2 cents on this. Perhaps, doctor, you would be well advised to retain an attorney for a very brief 2 or 3 hour research and opinion letter. But without trying to give you legal advice, I share the concern that your question reflects, and I would caution you about it.
Well, my son is coming for Thanksgiving and he's an attorney, so I'll just ask him.
Free opinion right there. Yeah, but very, very good catch, because I had not thought about that, and you bring up something that it's very important, especially for you and your license.
Yeah.
The other thing I had that I wanted to bring up at this meeting was to ask the commissioners, Dr. Palmer and you, Diego, and the other people, if we should change any of our LASIX restrictions. For example, CHRB, California, including all fairs, has changed the dosage on LASIX from, it was 3 to 10 cc's, same as the ARCI model and the same as we are. And they've changed it to the minimum 3 cc's, maximum 5 cc's, which probably would not affect anything as far as functioning in the horse. But I'm just asking, does the commission want to change any of the LASIX restrictions as far as 2-year-olds, dosage, anything?
What's Emerald Downs doing right now?
I do not know if they've changed it or not, but they are HISA, so they're going to be no LASIX.
Connie, what does it entail if we change that? We have to go through a rule change, or?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. It's just a standard rule change. We would bring a rule to you in January, and then we would begin the process of, we would certainly want to have a hearing for that, so the horsemen could give us their take on it, and anybody else who's interested. And this call, obviously, I'm sure, because we have representation from the associations, if there's any concerns, I'm sure they'll let us know right away as well.
Isn't the typical dose 5 cc's?
Yes, most of the horses are getting no more than 5 cc's. I don't think there's really any additional benefit because the half-life of LASIX is so short that giving a higher dosage is probably not any additional benefit.
So that was my next question, a more technical question of whether there's anything chemistry wise that would make that limitation to 5 cc's a problem for chronic bleeders. So I think I got my answer.
Right, and I guess but the downfall is that, some people, not myself, of course, but some people believe a little's good, a lot's better. So,
I think,
no, that's where that comes in. Rod, you had something?
Yeah, I
Rod
was
had his
just
hand
gonna ask Dr. Everman, what was the reasoning for wanting to change it? Just to try to match some of the other states, or is there a problem, or what's the reason for changing it?
It would just be because we race in very hot weather and it might reduce the dehydration on the horses a little bit. I think that's one of the problems. I noticed last year we had 4 bleeders last year and 3 of the 4 were on LASIX. So it's not a panacea. It doesn't prevent all bleeding. And whether it reduces the number, most people are using it as a weight reduction advantage in the racehorses rather than a bleeding issue. So with 5 cc's, a horse is going to lose 20 to 30 pounds of water in the first 2 hours. So the effect is still there, and giving more is probably not a huge advantage, and it's probably detrimental to the horse as far as electrolyte balance and additional dehydration.
I guess, I don't want to try to match other states. I mean, like, I guess California, I think there's some advantages to it for bleeders. And I do have some concerns about trying to, like in California, they don't want 2-year-olds running on Lasix, which I think that's, I know that's getting into, every jurisdiction has different medication rules. So I didn't know if it was just trying to match other states or if we're just trying to do something like you said. If you're trying to protect dehydration, then I understand that. So.
Well, I don't think it's going to make a huge difference, because I will say that last year when we had one race day that was extremely hot, it was really pushing the limit of the heat index. And we made an exemption that any horse could just skip the Lasix, even if they were on the program for Lasix. And we made an announcement that the horses could just not give Lasix. And I advised the horseman that was probably inadvisable because of the amount of heat. And most people complied with that or gave a lower dose. So we could deal with it either way. I just want to know the commission's feeling about whether or not we should start moving in a direction toward HISA or just stay where we are with these regulations.
I would just add that from a perception, I think it's a good move, since we know that it may help the horses and we're not going HISA. We can say, hey, listen, we are doing these steps and we are doing other things, because I'm sure the legislators will be asking us why we've chosen not to go to HISA. I think there's some very good reasons for not going there.
I agree with Connie, and I agree with Dr. Everman. And he did mention that it was for the benefit of the horse in terms of dehydration and electrolyte balance. And I think that's all I needed to hear to support the move, not because it's mimicking California, but because it's in the best interest of the horse, which I think what I would like to propose and what I would love to see, I just don't know how difficult this would be and how much time it would take. It's not necessarily a complete overhaul of our medication rules, but yes, a complete review. And when we see something that doesn't make sense anymore, we change it, regardless of what HISA is doing. I think that the no bute argument is terrible. I think bute, I've said it before, is Advil, and not allowing any athlete to take some Advil before or after an event is ridiculous. Same with Banamine and other drugs. At the same time, if we have true class A violations, I think the person should be at least, if not completely banned for life, I think they should have an automatic 3-year suspension and one more strike and they're out of Oregon. We need to be very, very strict and show all jurisdictions in the states that we have a rule, that we have our regulations that are actually sensible and looking out for the equine athlete. The hope of this whole thing is to gain some capital with other jurisdictions to show how stupid HISA is, and perhaps to invite other horses to Oregon. We can become a safe haven. We can become a place where your horses can run if they are racing sound. We have the proper rules to take care of them and make them feel good and make them, perform at a high level in good competition. And I think that would bring bigger fields, and maybe, who knows, maybe we start making some money at the track. So perhaps
Okay,
after,
I kind of
Go ahead, Jan, I'm sorry.
I have to, I don't necessarily disagree with your comments. That is, I don't want you to get the wrong impression. However,
Mhm.
your comment, and you've said it before, on I take bute, so therefore my horse should take bute, or Banamine, or whatever non-steroidal, is a little flawed. The problem is the horse isn't making the decision. If you as an athlete in competition want to make that decision, that's fine. That's great. You have some reasoning capabilities and can decide for yourself, but the horse can't. And it has other outside issues, namely a trainer and an owner, that have ulterior motives for making that decision. So you can't use that as an argument, Diego. Your other arguments are fine to say, okay, we're taking other steps to ensure the safety and welfare of the horses, and that's all great and fine. And I don't know if I'd use the word safe haven, because it almost sounds like we're here's the drug haven where you can come and we're Copenhagen and you can take your drugs here and we're fine. So I don't disagree with your reasoning. These are older horses racing, and they probably are going to need the benefit of bute to race in this state, most of them. Not all of them, but most of them. But you can't say I take it, therefore it can take it, because it isn't making the decision. Is that understandable?
Very understandable. And I think we can find ways, and this is why we start the discussion here. I think we can find ways to monitor if the horse really needs it or if it's being abused by the trainer or the owner. And I can think of some ways, but I think maybe we leave those details for the end part of the process and not now. But definitely you have a good point. It's just a matter of figuring out how to detect that, if a horse is using bute 3 times a week, someone should know and someone should look into that horse because something's wrong, of course. But just saying that you can take bute 72 hours before the race and not before then, that doesn't seem to be sensible to me.
Well, that's the detection level. So 72 hours is when it will be out of the system, theoretically.
Prior to HISA, California was 48 hours.
So we can leave those discussions for right.
So yeah, those details we can leave for later, but do we want to do a wholesome review of our medication rules, and perhaps after we do this at the ORC level, share that review with the horsemen and other stakeholders, so that if we need to modify anything, be it therapeutic levels or penalties and suspensions and all that, then we can approve an amended medication schedule.
We did that review probably, maybe Connie remembers, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. We did a big review because at the time it was the ACRI that was coming into effect. And so we reviewed everything, reviewed the rules, reviewed the limits, reviewed the punishments. So I don't know if it's time, maybe now is the fine time to say, let's review it again. Connie, do you remember when we did that?
It feels like it was 3 or 4 years ago, but I would defer to Dr. Everman. He
Mhm.
lives in those rules, and he probably has a much better opinion than I do on how the rules are today and how he'd like to see them.
So
Go ahead.
yeah, go ahead, Doctor. My proposal is not for you to now do this today, but perhaps if you can render, of course, I want to hear your opinion, the summary of your opinion now, but perhaps it's time for us to get some sort of a report from you, or allow you the opportunity to go through the schedule and give us your take and observations on several of the items. But please go ahead.
Well, the reality of our race in Oregon is that 97% of the horses ran on bute. Now, they don't all need bute. A lot of them are young horses. They're totally sound, totally healthy, but people think that if it's allowed, they're going to do it. because maybe there's something there they don't know about. Maybe the horse will run better on it. I disagree with that. I think you can't improve upon normal with non-steroidals. If the horse is sound and it's not sore, the non-steroidals are not going to help the horse. But that doesn't mean that people won't use it. So then the question comes, do we want to change the rule? We are now at 2 micrograms, which means that the horses can get bute 2 grams 24 hours before post time. We're doing pre-race exam somewhere between 4 and 8 hours before post time. So does the bute administered the previous day mask any lameness during the pre-race exam? That's the real question. I feel confident that we can detect significant lameness, unsoundness, injury to a horse, whether it's had the bute or not. However, this will be called into question anytime we have an injury, which fortunately in 2022, we didn't have anything that was related to an injury. We had one collision, but that's separate from any kind of medication. So I think it's a commission decision of whether or not we would want to change the administration of non-steroidal anti-inflammatories from 24 hours pre-race to 48 hours pre-race. And that would be because the reason for that would be whether or not it's masking pre-race examination findings.
I think that's well said, well put, and I understand it much better. And it's something that we have to look into. So just like now you provided this information on Butte and you may have recommendations. Is it possible for you in a reasonable time, and perhaps this requires a long period of time, to do the same thing with each item in that schedule?
Well, that's very doable. All the medications listed in our rules can be adjusted, and I can look at that as far as detection time. And of course, we have banned substances; those are all on detection time. But on the controlled therapeutic medications, we can look at whether or not those levels should be reduced, which would just mean administering the medications further out pre-race. And that's, I don't know, I don't have a feeling one way or the other, but I'm willing to administer the rules, whatever they are. Okay. Rod, what do you think about this as far as the racetrack operator and the horseman?
I understand your point. I totally agree with your point. If we had a problem, if we don't have a problem, then if it's not broken, don't fix it, you know. But if we feel like we have a problem, if you feel like, I think part of your statement is I don't feel like it's a problem. So, but, you know, it could be a better situation if it was 48 hours. So, again, if as a track operator, any medication changes, not everybody's going to always keep up to speed. And so then they're going to, you know, then there's going to be violations, and then there's going to be fines. And so if we don't have to change it, it's going to be better for the horseman. If it protects the racetrack and it protects the horse, then by all means, we should do that. So if you really feel 48 hours is the right thing to do, then as a racetrack operator, the last thing I want is a horse breaking down or a jockey getting injured or anything. So if that's masking it, if you really felt like it's masking it and it needs to be 48 hours out, then by all means, I think we should do that. If you,
And if I might, if we do have violations right after a rule change, we have in the past allowed for a grace period.
Okay,
where we take it easy on them until everybody gets up to speed. You know, and how long that grace period is kind of depends on what substance we're talking about, you know, and how much lead time they've had to get used to it. But that's always an option.
I would
So
also say,
Go ahead, Connie.
I would also say that if we were going to make any kind of medication changes, I would rather them do them now or in the next couple of months, so we have plenty of time to try to get the message out to all the horses. And the last thing I want to do is wait till March when we're right before racing.
Mhm.
And
I-
again, if it means we wait till next year because we can't make a decision now, I'd rather do that than, again, waiting until the last minute.
That's a good point, and I just wanted to start the conversation. I don't mean to have that debate today. I think we're a little bit past our time, but there's also a consideration for the horsemen and the track, everyone to take into account, and that is HISA. HISA is the big monster looming, and if we do not take these actions, and we are regarded as not looking out for the horse and not revamping or reassessing our rules, then we may lose some of the leverage that we have, the moral leverage or whatever leverage we have in saying, no, you know what, we are okay without HISA. We're taking care of our own in a very reasonable way. These are the adjustments that we have made recently because of new research or to come more into times, whatever it is. And that's what I want to have. I want to have that ammunition and that argument when we tell HISA, nope, not in Oregon, thank you, we'll pass.
How
And
about this? How about this as a plan? How about Connie first looking at when we last reviewed, if you can pull that up. There was quite a few meetings about it and it took months. And it was when the ACRI came into effect. So why don't you look up when we did that? If that's been 4 years or more, then why don't we start that review process again? Because it will take months, not just a quick review. It's a month's process of first someone looks at it, which would be Dr. Everman at this point in time, and reviews everything, reviews all the rules, reviews all the drug dosages. We looked at what was happening in Emerald Downs because at that time the issue was because they had adopted the ACR rules and we had not, that there was a big difference between the two states. So we tried to come more into compliance with that. Because there was some pushback on joining that in becoming part of their group in the beginning. So maybe you could start to look at those. Once that process was done, then it was reviewed with the horsemen. So there were several meetings. It took months for it to reach a final decision, but we could at least start that process and make the decision if it's been more than 4 years. Yeah, Connie?
I agree with that. I would appreciate or recommend that for the first rule that we talked about, the reduction of the LASIK, that we do go ahead and propose rules for that in January. Since we
That's
seem
fine.
like, yeah, and everything
Yeah.
else we just table until we look at the time frame.
Yeah, that's fine.
Agreed. Motion to adjourn. No, I don't know. You have the agenda, Jan. I don't know if there's anything left in the agenda. I was half joking.
No, there's nothing left. Adjournment.
Okay. Thank you all.
Okay, see ya.
thank
See
you.
ya.